Okay, I am here. Opinion is here. Let's finally talk about my first impressions of this expansion, Edge of Fate. I am sorry for the delay on this. There's a lot I wanted to discuss. The script's pretty long. I had to prepare for the raid, and then I had the raid, and then I had the raid guide, and then I had the GCX convention. I've been very busy, but we're here. Let's talk about the story first. There will be spoilers in this, so if you haven't finished the campaign, you might just want to skip ahead. We are starting something new here for the first time since, I guess, Destiny 2 launch, which had a very simple premise. Gaul wants Traveler's Light, gimme, must stop him. This new story that's revving up had a bit more going on, and I got a lot of, I'll be nice, I'll say, I got a lot of feedback early on from people that they thought the story was bad. And when I asked why, the majority of the responses were, I didn't understand what was happening. I think that's a fair criticism to have if you felt that it was a bit harder to follow, but I'm not sure how fair it is to say that the story was bad because you couldn't follow along. I did not think it was that bad to follow along with the story, even as someone who was playing with multiple other people who were talking during some dialogue, and as someone who only gets into the lore at a pretty surface level. That being said, I do want to run the campaign again to make sure that I've locked in on some of the things that happened, because while I was following pretty well with the whole The Nine plot points, some of the House of Exiles stuff got a little lost on me in the middle. But I thought as an introduction to the storyline of The Nine, getting to meet them in a scene towards the end, all that was pretty cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing where they take this plotline. We also haven't gotten a ton of pre-collapse lore bits or pre-Golden Age, pre-anything really at the surface level. So a lot of the reveals that happened towards the end of the campaign I thought were pretty cool. The story, in short, I think was that we were called to Kepler by 3 of the 9 who was actually dead and summoned us to bind the 9, whatever the hell that will end up meaning. The reality of everything that's happened in the franchise has been that the 9 have not so subtly been causing the many situations that have all led us to this moment right now. We were also dealing with the House of Exile, namely the Archon, as part of the story hook for this expansion specifically, whereas the stuff with the 9 is going to be more of the long-term story. I wasn't too enamored with the House of Exile and the Aeonian stuff personally. I didn't think it was bad, but my eyes were all on the stuff happening with the 9 first and foremost. I did think that the Archon was at least a somewhat fun character to be listening to and having conversations with, even if it felt like he was giving a theater-like performance sometimes, although that was likely intended to some degree. I feel like it was directed like that, given his character and the situation that he found himself in. Also, at least the Aeonian campus felt lived in a bit, with random NPCs scattered around the main hub of Caldera. Some of them you can talk to with that new dialogue box and all that kind of stuff. Deborah Wilson as Ikora, when she is normally known as Savathun, at the start of the campaign was pretty jarring. I do like the way that Mara Juno plays Ikora, a bit more soft-spoken and reserved, but as the intensity of the situation happening in the story grew, the way Deborah handled Ikora also started to grow on me, and I did end up having a better time listening to her play Ikora than I thought I was going to. For those who were not as interested in the performance, Deborah Wilson is a temporary voice for Ikora due to the newly resolved SAG-AFTRA union strike for voice actors. Kind of tough spot for Bungie to be in, seeing as they probably didn't want to launch a major expansion with zero voiceover for some very important characters. Episode Heresy was missing dialogue, and that was a very big deal. I would much rather have characters be voiced by someone than no one at all, just having to read the lines at the bottom of my screen, because I probably wasn't going to read it, and a lot of it would not have stuck. As for Lodi, I like him as a character, and it looks like he might be around for a little bit. He feels normal, and that's because he just is normal. I mean, he was literally plucked out of the 1970s or whatever and pulled here. I thought the voiceover performance was pretty good for him overall. He wasn't cringe or anything. He didn't say anything too weird or unfunny. I did like the more theatrical one-on-one that he had with the Archon towards the beginning of the campaign. I thought that was a fun moment. Honestly, my only real complaint is that some of these dramatic pauses were just a little too long. Although I'm not sure if they were recorded like that or just timed in a way in-game that made them seem too long. I did also like Orin, and I wanted a little bit more of her, but again, I want to go back and play the campaign once more to get a better feel for things. I might wait until the original voices are put into the game so I can listen to the differences in performance, though. I do wish Bungie were a little faster on the draw with some of the story stuff, because it did, again, feel a little bit slow going into the first half, with the second half picking up a bit more. Even though when I went to my preview event, we had the dialogue off and the subtitles off, and I had no idea what was happening, things still felt a bit familiar, just even being in the missions over again and all that. So I think that's something that I just kind of need to manage for myself, though, going forward. You know, as soon as some of these bigger plot points started to hit, some of these cutscenes and all that, I got a lot more invested. I got a lot more excited to hear what was happening, especially some of the end cutscenes and whatnot. So yeah, story-wise, I was like partially to mostly satisfied. I'm okay with there being a lot of unanswered questions because we're setting up a new story arc, and you're not going to be able to answer everything in a single expansion, much less the first one, nor would you even want to. So let's move to gameplay. As for this expansion feeling slightly bigger than Rise of Iron, as Bungie claimed, I would say that take holds up, at least when discussing the campaign and Kepler-specific experience. The campaign was way longer than Rise of Iron was, but gameplay-wise, when compared to the previous 3 expansion campaigns, I think this one is a little bit on the weaker side of things, not even counting all the Metroidvania stuff. I think the most memorable fight was the finale, which had a couple of fun moments, but nothing on the scale that I feel like we got with something like Witch Queen, which to me had the most memorable final boss experience so far. The other campaign fights were fine, but the whole splitting the health bars into 2 or 3 to do one of the Kepler mechanics, it did get a little bit old, and the bosses themselves weren't anything too crazy. But do I still prefer this campaign to stuff pre-Witch Queen, like Beyond Light and earlier? Absolutely I do. Some of the scaling felt a little different, though. Like, normally, the solo campaign experience has felt tougher than being in a stack of 3. This time around, though, the Legendary campaign did feel like a little bit of a slog due to some of these inflated health pools on enemies. I'm not usually one to complain about tanky enemies, but even for me, some of the enemies felt like they had health for the sake of having health. This, combined with the new ammo generation system, led to a lot of plink-plonk moments firing away with primary weapons at a health bar that just didn't really feel like going down. I felt like I was starved for ammo a lot of the time, and that's because you didn't spawn in with full ammo when you started a mission. Only when I hit a rally flag did I feel like things were somewhat normal. Bungie has since adjusted ammo drop rates, though, which I think we discussed one more time in this video. As for the Kepler abilities, I did not hate them nearly as much as it felt like everybody else did. I didn't mind going into a ball and navigating around an arena or using the cannon to teleport around or like whatever. But one of my worries for these gameplay elements was mentioned in my preview videos, or my QA, whichever it was, where I said that, quote, it feels like the puzzle-solving element was trying to find where the hole in the wall was, end quote, more so than it was actually doing puzzle solving. It's only at the very end of the campaign that I feel like there's any sort of more interesting puzzle solving, or at the very least, novelty of the mechanics. I also got the vibe that there would be a bit more of the you gotta come back later to do this during the campaign. But since the campaign pushes you towards one of two sections at the start, there's only so much you can do with that while you're in the campaign. After you finish those two sections, I think you're railroaded into the next parts. So it didn't feel like I could go get the teleport cannon first and then look around and find some holes in the wall and then be like, oh, okay, I gotta get that thing next. I don't have that ability. You were just fed the items in order. There were some collectibles and whatnot scattered around the world for when you have most of the upgrades, and those puzzles were at least a little more interesting than what we got during the campaign, although hardly much of a brain buster. Most of the time, the puzzle part just ended up being, okay, where's the thing that I need to interact? Where's the stupid little charge station or like whatever? Because it would be hidden somewhere, like around a corner or up a hill or just out of normal line of sight. But again, I never feel like Bungie gets to do more than just the lowest common denominator type stuff for these concepts because they want to keep things simple enough that people don't get stuck. As a result, we get puzzles that we instantly know how to solve other than finding where the hole in the wall is to make it all happen. Or it's some simple trial and error. Nothing ever really made me think too hard. Some of the Matter Spark combat stuff was fun, and in those encounters where you can have one person doing one job and another person doing another job, and you just chain things together between your teammates, that feels fun, like the final encounters in the campaign. But the campaign is designed to be soloable, meaning Bungie couldn't really do many things where one person does a thing and then another person has to do another thing at the same time or like immediately after, whatever. Everything is very loose timing-wise because you need to be able to do it all yourself, which I understand, but it also feels like a missed opportunity for more novel puzzles or mechanics. I don't think there's anything that required multiple people. There's no fire team-based Kepler content at all. So yeah, I just kind of feel like that was a missed opportunity. I realize it was Bungie's first attempt at such a thing, but it just feels like they need to play so scared in stuff like this. Almost like everything else that they've done over the past year, like the exotic missions, right? I don't know if the intent is to make sure that no one struggles at all, or if they just genuinely don't have any desire to go farther than some of the more basic concepts. I'm sure if I asked someone at Bungie, I'm going to get hit with like some metrics that say like, oh, players will more often quit the game altogether if they feel like they're getting stuck on a puzzle. So we want to make sure that they can get through it without too much of a struggle. That's you, Bungie. And like, okay, that's noble and all, but it means that they just never get to push the envelope until the very end. And I'm using that phrase generously. Or you got like Ghost yelling out what to do after 15 seconds seeing the puzzle. Like, let me figure it out, man. I'm getting the lay of the land here. Like, some of the Matter Spark platforming sections in the finale are neat sequences that finally just get to barely start pushing some boundaries, but it's over before you even get to sink your teeth into it. The finale mission is where I want Bungie to start when it comes to these concepts, not end. I'd still rather Bungie try to do something novel and have it not be liked or have it not work out over just continuing to put the same things out every single expansion. Although apparently, from what I've been reading, everyone just wants the same things from before the expansion anyway, so like, what do I know? I've done a very limited amount of Mythic World Tier stuff on Kepler, but I did end up doing all of the missions for the quests that you get, and they were brutal because of both the lethality of the enemies and the ammo situation. I would like to make some more maybe Mythic quality builds to try out the missions again at some point in the near future, though, to give a better assessment of them. Fabled World Tier has not really felt that bad at all, though. The Portal and the level grind. A lot to discuss here. I am not super far in my power grind. I think I'm like 240, something like that. And getting to 240 has been incredibly, incredibly easy. Maybe not time-wise, but like the amount of skill that I needed to display in order to get to 240 was not very high. So most of my feedback for the higher level stuff comes from friends who are hitting those higher levels and what I think of those situations. I want to start with this. While I realize that stuff like old raid and dungeon content is probably not what the more casual crowd will be running on a day-to-day basis, I think we absolutely need raid ops and or dungeon ops. For a system that was built to make older bits of content more relevant again, the fact that 0 old raids and 0 old dungeons are included in the portal right now is kind of a travesty to me. I know Bungie has spoken about getting dungeons into Pinnacle Ops to some degree, but old raids absolutely need to be a part of the leveling process. At the very least, a couple of them. I would be okay with them just having higher level items to use as infusion fodder for the time being. Like, that's all I want them to do for now. Obviously, it would be awesome if Bungie could go back and revamp the old raids to utilize the new gear system, like weapon and armor tiers and all that, and give them set bonuses, the whole nine, right? But for now, I would gladly take being able to level through raiding or dungeoning. I realize that someone is going to figure out the best dungeon to run is XYZ on repeat, or the best raid to run on repeat, or the best encounter to farm on repeat. And there's only so much Bungie can do about that besides hyper-specific activity reward tuning. But for people who don't plan on torturing themselves, being able to level through dungeoning or raiding, I think would be pretty awesome. The fact that running the newest raid on base difficulty doesn't give you any higher level drops is crazy to me. That is crazy. I can live without getting some tier 3 or tier 4 gear from the raid on base difficulty, but you're not even going to give me some levels, man? So I just want some levels. I guess that would lead to situations where people spam farm certain bosses for levels, so maybe you could just make it so doing full clears give loot, or like your first clear of the week gives more power, similar to like the red border quest that you would pick up from Hawthorne in the tower. But raids should give a somewhat healthy bump of power, at least on first clear of the week. The feats system I think is awesome though. I don't think I talked about it much in the raid video because I just didn't have a lot of experience with feats, but after running a 2 and now a 3 feat raid, I thought it was a lot of fun as someone who is very immersed in the raiding scene. What wasn't that fun was still getting like tier 1 drops doing a 2 feat raid. Although now that I've completed a 3 feat raid and now have the +1 tier upgrade for raid drops, maybe we'll see a little more consistency there. I feel like 3 feats should be like you get tier 3s. Like 3 feats and tier 3, and maybe like some tier 4s on a rare occasion. Hopefully that's how it's going to work soon because I know Bungie is making some changes. I do think a base level clear should probably drop tier 2 a little more often though. It feels kind of bad to run this raid, which is definitely a bit harder than the average raid, and end up with some very poorly statted armor, even if the 4-piece set bonus is pretty nice. So let's get to the Encore torture spam. Quick history lesson, Encore, a mission in the Pinnacle Ops playlist for the first couple of days, was the best place to level up by far. You could do a run in about 15 minutes and get quite a lot of items, especially if there was a target item on the activity. Since then, there has been some rebalancing. I don't think it's even available as of this video, but there's usually a best activity to spam on any given day based on the rewards dropping from said activity. As mentioned earlier, there's only so much Bungie can do to fine-tune the rewards of an activity. If people could save 15 seconds on something to make that the better thing to run for loot, they would run that activity with that 15-second time save. They're just going to do it. You also have to account for the massive gaps in skill of the player base. For some players out there, Encore is truly a 30-minute run. There is no way that Bungie can fine-tune every activity for every skill band. But Bungie is not making you run Encore 800 times in a row. They're not forcing you to do that. People are choosing that to be at the highest level of efficiency when leveling, and as a result, are hating their lives just to make number go up a little more efficiently. I understand wanting to be at your most efficient while leveling up and playing the game, spending time on the game. I would certainly love to do that. I do not understand inflicting that amount of psychic damage on yourself in order to make it happen. Like, dudes would rather grind 10 hours of Starcross 6 days a week to get to the level cap slightly faster than go to therapy. It is a video game, y'all. If you are torturing yourself just to make a number go up a little bit faster, I'm not sure how much of that is Bungie's fault. That doesn't mean the system's perfect, but when you're choosing to spend 8 hours straight in Encore or Kel's Fall, I don't know what to say to that. Recently, the Mint Retrograde Rocket Pulse was farmable in Kel's Fall. That I can understand since it's a specific drop tied to a specific activity. You're farming levels and you're farming loot, and like the rocket pulse is really, really good, right? But just general leveling, I think people are also still very heavily in the mindset of hitting max level as their primary goal or thing they must do first in order to enjoy the rest of the game. And I don't think that's the right thought process anymore. Like, I don't think the average person should be frantically leveling just for the sake of it. Do I think things could be moving a little bit faster for most people? Yeah, I think probably at least a little bit. I think levels could come a little bit faster. But if you're optimizing the fun out of the game for yourself to make number go up faster, but also complaining that it sucks and that you hate every single second of it, I can't relate. If you find yourself in this position, I would just wait for Bungie to make some adjustments to this, because they will. Like, try to actually enjoy your play sessions. Instead, people are any percent speedrunning their way to being miserable. Now, what I can say is that this is hopefully a signal to Bungie that something probably needs to shift here. People should not feel like they need to grind the same activity on repeat to be at their most efficient while they're on the game. People should want the feeling of being at their most efficient, or maybe close to max efficiency, when power leveling, doing truly whatever they want. It is not good optics to have people just spamming the same activity over and over to level and telling people, yeah, the best way to level is to run Encore 16 hours a day, right? We had this with D2 launch. The most efficient way to level in D2 launch was running public events, and that sucked ass. This is a very similar vibe. However, there are some people out there who genuinely want to just farm the same activity over and over, so you might want to not take that completely away from them either. I'm not really too sure on that, though. What doesn't help is that it appears that everyone's bonus engrams are different. So I might have a Fireteam Ops. That's a bonus activity, but my teammate might not. So instead of fighting about what activity we're going to run, we'd probably just try to do something that rewards us with the same amount of loot every time, which means going to whatever the farm of the day is. If this is the way the system's going to be, then Bungie needs to increase the activity offerings in Pinnacle Ops and incentivize ping-ponging around a bit more, even more than like the green engram thing that they're doing right now, like the bonus drops. In fact, it might not be a bad idea to increase offerings everywhere. Fireteam Ops feels like it has enough going on that a mid-season update would be okay, but Pinnacle Ops needs serious help. Fireteam Ops also has roughly the same time commitment per activity on offer, although I'm not including Onslaught or Coil in that. So it doesn't feel as bad to switch from activity to activity when it might only be like a minute difference at most on average. You also have these conquest activities that have specific level and modifier requirements to hit, and they drop a bunch of loot upon completion, but they're only available to run once. I haven't done my first one just yet, but I'm getting very strong vibes similar to when Grandmaster Nightfalls launched, and they were designed to just be a one and done. And those eventually became one of the most farmed and played activities in the game. I get that the idea is that you have to beat this challenge and get a big reward for doing so, but maybe make them like once a week thing. Make them a weekly thing. I know we're trying to get away from weekly leveling, but, you know, maybe a weekly. That way people can come in and get like a nice chunk of rewards once a week. Something to look forward to once a week. Some anecdotal stuff from my friends here, since I'm not level 300. There also appears to be some level scaling, grade scaling problems as you progress into the 300s, where if your team is too varied in levels, even with Fireteam power, you will not be able to place enough modifiers onto an activity that will enable you to get an A rank score, aka the best loot. This leads to people going to solo ops instead when they want to be playing with their friends. I'm not 100% on that. Again, I haven't hit 300, so feel free to update me in the comments on that one. PvP could also use some slight adjustments too. There are some solo ops that can get you loot at almost twice the rate of PvP matches due to their average length. Again, that comes back to like what's the most efficient, even though there's only so much that can be done about that. Then you have the 400 to 450 power grind, which I'm sure 99.9% of you watching are not even remotely close to. Again, I'm 240, not close either. As of a recent update, it seems like the 400 to 450 grind has gotten a little bit better now that people really understand that Guardian ranks really do improve your loot. People were hitting Guardian rank 9 and noted that the frequency and or quality of drops after 400 have very much improved. I can't speak to it myself just yet though. Conceptually, I am very on board with go do whatever you want to level, but there are definitely some things that need to be ironed out before it's in a good place. I want to see old raids be brought into the mix. I want to see old dungeons be brought into the mix. That content is too good and too fun to not be included in a system that was designed to revitalize old content. Pinnacle Ops definitely needs reinforcing as well. It is not a good look when the majority of people are spamming the same activity over and over again to level, even if it's the most efficient. I personally don't plan on torturing myself too much in Pinnacle Ops though. Bungie's taking all this feedback, they're seeing where the frustration is, and they're very likely going to make some adjustments. It's a new system, it's very different to what we've had, and it was not going to launch perfectly. I will be waiting to see the fixes. Next, we have the new stat changes, and this is something I haven't gotten to dive into as much compared to the other things, so I can really only give some spark notes here. I have found myself saving so many pieces of gear because anything can be good now based on your build, which I think is awesome. I've gotten the question, what stats should I get on insert class here? And the answer is anything you want. We no longer live in a world where each class should be getting the exact same stats because those were just the best stats in the game. The best stats now completely depend on the build that you are going for. There is no blanket answer for go for these stats anymore, which I find very refreshing. I got a lot of people still thinking like, oh, I should just be getting weapons all the time, right? I'm working on a melee build right now. Melee's my most important stat. A different build grenade's going to be your most important stat. I'm still working my way to tier 3, so for now I think a lot of the stuff that I've saved will likely go in the trash, but eventually I know I will get to a place where I'm going to want to save a lot of armor. I look forward to eventually purging all of my old gear for the new stuff, and we don't even have every combination of stat available in the game yet. Not even half of them. We're getting more vault space in the next expansion, I think anyway, so that will hopefully alleviate some short-term pains. The core economy, on the other hand, at least at the top end, feels pretty intense, although I'm not exactly at 400 power yet. But I've seen certain upgrades costing thousands of cores, and while I've seen people with hundreds of thousands of cores in their inventory already, that is still a very scary number to people. When I actually reach those levels, I can report on it a little bit better, but fortunately, tuning the amount of cores needed to level up gear is something that can be reasonably adjusted. So if it is that much of a problem, it'll be tweaked without too much difficulty, I assume anyway. At the lower end, I have had very little issue with the core economy. To those who have been struggling for whatever reason, just remember that you don't need to infuse literally every single item you ever get into your gear. All that being said, I have not even had a chance to log onto other characters yet to see how the leveling and core economy affects second and third characters. I would like to follow up on that at some point. As for the new gear bonuses, again, unless you farmed the literal perfect armor pre-expansion and you only plan on using armor with like weapons and super stats, I just find it so hard to believe that people won't eventually get and use new items. But this system appears to be so insanely hated that I cannot imagine it being long for this world. I can understand being somewhat annoyed with the avant-garde modifier, which is the new/featured gear only modifier, this early into the expansion when people are still fleshing out their armor sets and their weapons and whatnot. That being said, literally everyone I've spoken to completely despises the idea of this modifier. So I just completely scrapped this whole part of the video. I am not going to sit here to try to give feedback on a thing that most people want to see just completely eliminated and likely will be. For what it's worth, exotic class items should probably be considered new gear pretty much all the time because they're a pretty core part of the prismatic experience, and prismatic getting semi-blocked because of this modifier doesn't feel that great. Moving on. If the new gear, featured gear system is going to stick around, I think that the new gear tag should maybe be extended to a year instead of a single expansion if this is what Bungie is looking to do. Especially when this first season of the new era is only going to be 4.5 months instead of 6. That, or have something similar to the older sunsetting system where the new gear tag expires 1 year after its release. This way, it's not happening all at once for players and they can do some mix and matching versus feeling like they need to start completely over from scratch. But again, wouldn't surprise me if new gear was killed off as a concept by Renegades, so I'm just going to save my breath here. Otherwise, there have been a lot of bugs or general issues with the expansion, although the game being buggy shouldn't come as much of a surprise anymore. Things like tons of missing patch notes, which I know is not done with malice, but it's still annoying to have to research what is intentional and what is not. Things like the stat revamp not even being correct at launch. For reference, Bungie said that 70 of a stat currently will be equal to 100 of a stat pre-expansion, but Bungie came out and said that it was wrong, and it was actually 85 for 3 of the stats. Now this has already been corrected, so like, okay, but how does something like that happen? That's like the huge part of the revamp, and it launched broken for 2 weeks. It just leaves a terrible taste in the mouth seeing so many issues. The only thing that felt like it went smoothly was the actual launch of the expansion itself. I got in right away. A lot of my friends got in right away. Seems like the login experience was good, so that's nice, I guess. And Bungie has been posting a lot about feedback to things, like they've already buffed ammo generation and they're fixing/changing the raid difficulty because the balance was off for like all of the raids. So I can appreciate some of these faster moves being made here to patch the game. Ultimately though, while I do think there are some novel things in the expansion, and while I don't hate it as much as it feels like most other people do, I don't think this expansion is something that will wake up someone who is tired of Destiny. If you stop playing after Final Shape because you just felt done or you were just tired, I'm not sure how much of an adrenaline boost you're going to get from Edge of Fate, unless you were taking a break for non-burnout reasons. If you've been gone longer than that, I'm talking multiple years at this point, then maybe you'll have a good time just coming back and being back in the universe again. It just depends on why you stopped playing. People who were still enjoying the game before the expansion are still probably enjoying the experience to varying degrees, though. If you're someone who is upset that you need to grind new armor in the grinding armor game or grind new weapons in the grinding weapons game, this is probably not going to be for you. Bungie has absolutely brought back the grind with resetting our power levels, changing the power level grind to actually be more than just 10 levels every few months, tiered loot, tiers 1 through 5, all of that stuff. I'm guessing some tweaks will come over the next few months to these systems, so I would absolutely understand if you wanted to wait things out until Bungie does more updates and irons things out to make them a bit friendlier. Edge of Fate was mainly about foundational changes, which needed to happen at some point. But I understand foundational changes aren't as sexy as a new subclass or new aspects or sandbox things. Yeah, I would love a new subclass too. I would love new gameplay things, new sandbox things. But right now, all I can do is hope that they bring some of that stuff with upcoming expansions. All that being said, and I know I've said that a lot in this video, the insane negativity surrounding this launch is probably the worst I've ever seen. And I do realize that I say that every time, but that's because it really feels like it just gets worse every time. I have never felt so bad for trying to enjoy new Destiny content in my life. It was a completely and utterly demoralizing experience trying to stream this game on the first day. People wondering why player counts are so low when the subreddit has spent the past 2 months talking about why they aren't going to play. I can hear the We Did It Reddits echoing across the world as we speak. People already deciding whatever they wanted to decide 30 minutes into the experience. My own YouTube audience talking shit about me and the game for like 6 hours straight during the campaign on my live stream. I'm like, why am I even here, bro? And it's not like a bunch of the criticisms aren't valid. Again, I tend to agree with a fair amount of things being said. But how things are said can matter more than what is actually being said. You could be making the greatest points of all time, but if you're being demeaning and vitriolic, I'm just not going to take you seriously as an individual. And that just makes it all the more difficult to want to continue to engage with this community. It just makes me want to clock in and clock out. And I find that really sad because I used to engage so much more. I used to spend hours and hours more doing that. Now, that 6 p.m. alarm goes off and I just want to go home. And that sucks. That sucks really bad. It's exhausting. It's demoralizing. It makes me feel fake as a creator because in general, people feel like content creators must enjoy what they do 100% of the time and the content that they make. And if they don't, then they're inauthentic and shallow and just in it for the money. But that's where I feel right now, man. I'm not going to be toxic positivity guy and say like, everything's great. You're all just being haters, right? Like, but I'm also going to try to at least give constructive feedback and try to get this game into a better position as much as I am able to make that happen, which is probably not that much. I would say, let me know how you're feeling about the expansion, but I feel like I already know the answer. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.